Hey, it's Dan from Hops Gnarly on YouTube, and this presentation is all about the New England IPA. For the past couple months, I've been on a mission to break down each component of a New England IPA by testing best practices and brewing batch after batch. So far, I've brewed 8 different beers, testing everything from water profiles to dry hopping schedules and obsessing over every little detail. In this presentation, we'll define the style and walk through everything I've learned so far about the water, malt, hops, and yeast required to make a great New England IPA. Finally, we'll head out to the brewery and make some beer. The Beer Judge Certification Program, or BJCP, defines the New England IPA category under 21B Specialty IPA. Overall, you can think of this style as an American IPA with intense fruit flavors and aromas, a soft body and smooth mouthfeel, and often opaque with substantial haze. There should be less perceived bitterness than traditional IPAs, but they're always massively hop forward. The aroma should be intense, typically with fruity qualities reflective of newer American and New World hop varieties without being grassy or herbaceous. Clean, neutral malt in the background, potentially with a light bready sweetness without caramel or toast. Absence of any malt character is a fault. Neutral to fruity fermentation character that is well integrated with the hops. A creamy, buttery, or acidic aroma is inappropriate. Any perceived alcohol character should be restrained and never hot. Color ranges from straw to yellow, sometimes with an orange hue. It's hazy and often opaque, but should not be cloudy or murky. The opacity can add a shine to the beer and make the color seem darker. Any visible floating particulates, whether it's hop matter, yeast clumps, or anything like that, are a fault. Medium to rocky meringue white head with high to very high retention. The hop flavor is high to very high and reflects the same characteristics as the aroma. The perceived bitterness can be somewhat low to medium high, often being masked by the body and finish of the beer. The hop character in the aftertaste should not be sharp or harsh. Low to medium malt flavor, generally neutral, sometimes having a bready, grainy, lightly sweet flavor. Noticeable toast or caramel flavors are a flaw. Fermentation character is neutral to fruity, but as with the aroma, supportive of the hops. Off dry to medium finish, creamy, starchy, or sugary sweet flavors are inappropriate, although a high ester level and lower bitterness may give the impression of up to moderate sweetness. A moderate supportive alcohol character is acceptable, but should never be hot or dominating. Medium to medium full body with a smooth character. There's no harsh, hop-derived astringency, and the alcohol warmth may be present in stronger versions but should never be hot. Medium carbonation is standard. The beer should not have a creamy or viscous mouthfeel, an acidic twang, or a raw starch texture. This is probably one of the more famous examples of a New England IPA, Juicy Bits from WeldWerks. It has a golden yellow color and it's beautifully hazy. The head is a perfect white meringue that sticks around until you finish the pint. The aroma is definitely intense with huge notes of citrus and fruit, and you can also catch notes of malt in the background. The flavor reflects the aroma with notes of ripe fruit and citrus. It has just enough bitterness and malt character to balance the hop flavors with a smooth but not overly chewy mouthfeel. To me, this is exactly what you should be aiming for when making a New England IPA. Now that we've defined the style, let's jump into the components that you'll need to make this beer, starting with the water. Water is a critical component of this style because it has the ability to change your perception of the hop bitterness and the body of the beer. A good starting point for your water profile is a 2-to-1 chloride to sulfate ratio, which would end up looking something like this. This water profile will give you a very soft mouthfeel and also a softer hop bitterness. But after experimenting a little bit, I decided that an IPA should be refreshing, and in order to achieve that, I needed a water profile that looked like this. This preference will vary from brewer to brewer, but anything in between these two profiles should be great. The grain bill isn't the star of the show here, but it plays a supporting role that makes the final result possible. First, we need a base malt, something like a pale or a pilsner, and a good amount of oats. Choose your base malt based on the color, and remember that you can use a combination. I found that I liked a combination of pale and Vienna, but I've also seen great results from a pale and pilsner combination. The oats tend to make the mash sticky, so make sure you use rice hulls to make the mash drain correctly, and consider using malted oats, which include a husk and can also aid in drainability. Here's an example of a final grain bill. For hops, we're looking for a little bitterness and a lot of fruit, so you want a newer variety of hops, and there are tons of options. Generally, you want something from Australia, New Zealand, or the US, but there are awesome hops coming from all around the world these days. For timing, you usually won't need a bittering addition, so I found that a 30-minute boil was plenty. If you want to, you can add a small addition at 15 minutes, but most of your hot side hops will be added during the Whirlpool or hop stand. The difference between these two techniques is the Whirlpool is constantly stirred in one direction, typically powered by a pump, and for a hop stand, you'll just let the hops steep without any stirring. For this style, you'll also want to dry hop. This can be done in a single charge at the end of fermentation or split up into several charges. It's common to dry hop in New England IPA when the yeast is most active to encourage the yeast to convert non-aromatic compounds into aromatic compounds through the process of biotransformation. Both practices will produce great results, and you can further encourage the process of biotransformation by using enzymes such as aromazine from Lallemand. Hops are probably the most important component of this style, but yeast is a close second. Choose a low flocculating yeast that's known for producing this style. Also, be sure to pitch the suggested rate or higher to reduce lag time and stalled fermentations. Here are a few suggestions to look into, and there are plenty of others to choose from. Other factors that contribute to a great New England IPA are time and exposure to oxygen. Because you're hopping at such a high rate, it's important to keep your beer away from oxygen, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't give your beer time to condition. I'd suggest an oxygen-free dry hopping technique such as using magnets or a tri-clamp hop dropper, and at the very least, using a closed transfer when packaging this beer. Once it's packaged, you can store the beer cold for up to 2 weeks to condition. At that point, you'll want to consume your beer fresh. Now that we've walked through each of the components, I think it's time to make some beer. If you ask the internet what a hazy IPA water profile should look like, you'd probably find a lot of talk about 2-to-1 chloride to sulfite ratios, but I need a little more brightness than that. For this beer, I'm starting with some local spring water, and I'm adjusting the water profile using gypsum, calcium chloride, Epsom salt, and canning salt. I'm targeting a water profile with 150 parts per million sulfate and 200 parts per million chloride. For the grain bill, I'm starting with 60% proximity base malt and 24% oats. But to make sure the mash is a bit more manageable, I'm using half malted oats and half flaked oats. To that, I'm adding a little over 5% each of dextrin and wheat malt for head retention and Vienna malt for color. This will be a single infusion mash, and I'm shooting for a mash temperature of 154 degrees Fahrenheit or about 68 degrees Celsius. I'll keep mashing this in until everything is nice and saturated and holding steady at our target mash temperature of 152 Fahrenheit or 67 Celsius. Then I'll let the mash bed settle for a few minutes before starting the recirculation and a 1-hour timer. It can be a little tempting to walk away from the mash at this point and come back an hour later, but I've found that doesn't quite work as well as you might think. Mash conversion is a chemical process and it isn't quite as simple as heating things up to the right temperature. Don't go nuts stirring everything around, but about every 15 minutes or so, rake the top of the mash and make sure the system is recirculating correctly. And if you can't recirculate the mash with a pump, pull a quart or so from the bottom and pour it over the top every time you check in. After an hour of mashing, check the pre-boil gravity and increase the temperature for mash out. After about 10 minutes at mash out temperature, it's time to yank these grains and get our boil started. Okay, we're up to a full boil and our 30-minute timer starts now. It's been 15 minutes and it's time for the first hop addition. Here's 22 grams of Idaho 7, which should start us out at about 6.5 IBUs. I'm also going to start recirculating through my plate chiller to sanitize it. We've been boiling this wort for 30 minutes now and it's time for the Whirlpool. Let's drop the temperature to 160 Fahrenheit or about 71 Celsius. Okay, time for the next hop addition. I'm adding 39 grams each of Citra, Eldorado, and Ricao. This will spin for 30 minutes and then I'll cool the wort down to pitching temperature, oxygenate with pure oxygen, and transfer everything into my Anvil Crucible conical fermenter.
Alright, hold on everybody. Hold together. 10 seconds.
When I tested yeast strains, I loved the flavors that Imperial Barbarian produced and the haze that came from Imperial Juice. But in the end, I had to go with Juice and Barbarian in the same batch. The next day, things were rocking and rolling, and on day 3, I decided it was time for the first dry hop. I'm adding 41 grams each of Citra, Eldorado, and Ricao. But what I'm most excited about is trying out this enzyme from Lallemand that's supposed to aid in biotransformation. I added about 1.7 grams to this 10-gallon batch. When I hit final gravity, I bumped the temperature up 5 degrees for 2 days. Then I cold crashed, then I dry hopped it one more time, let it hang out for a couple more days, and alright, can we just taste this thing already? I can't tell you how psyched I am to taste this beer. The color is a light straw yellow and it's completely opaque. The aroma is jumping out of the glass with notes of tropical fruit, strawberries, and like this grape aroma that kind of reminds me of Purple Powerade. The mouthfeel is big and bold, and somehow it still finishes somewhat dry. Going in for a sip, it's nice and tropical with a supportive bitterness that brings you right to that somewhat dry finish. And that's where I hit that purple Powerade note. It's got this dimension that I was missing with some of the other batches I've brewed. And I don't think this beer is the only thing I've gotten out of this experience. While I've spent time getting to know the ingredients that make up a great hazy IPA, I've also learned a lot about process and my equipment. Just spending time practicing with intention is worth it in itself. And it's not like I've mastered this style by any means, but I learned a lot by staying focused on a single style and resisting the urge to change all the variables at one time. Guys, thanks for hanging out with me today. If you like this presentation, there's a whole playlist that goes along with it over on my YouTube channel. Just search for Hops Gnarly. Cheers.
Mm-hmm.